All right, welcome to Atheists Having Cocktails with Christians. My name is Simon. I will be your host, and I'm very excited to introduce our two-part first series with Jimmy P. Brown II from legendary Christian metal band Deliverance. Let's go.
This is my show. It's called Atheists Having Cocktails with Christians.
Sure.
And I used to be, I'm going to just give you a little brief history of me real quick and people that are watching. I grew up in Ventura, California, about an hour away from Hollywood. So in my formative years of music, which I think for most people, music really is going to define the soundtrack of your youth. You know what I mean? From rock and roll to metal to jazz. I mean, I think it's, a universal thing,
Sure, I agree.
And so luckily I was able to, see bands, like you guys and Vengeance, and go to Sanctuary every now and then when Roger was the pastor down there. So definitely I'm not a believer anymore. So it's always just kind of puzzled me about, the real ins and outs of the industry. You know what I mean? And that's why I'm starting with music, because, I think everybody just has their own way of seeing how their faith, and maybe, being young and having music being such a big influence, maybe they've, moved away from that over a certain time, but you can still appreciate the music that you grew up with. You know what I mean? Like, coincidentally today or yesterday, this came in the mail. So I ordered it back in March, and it showed up in the mail yesterday. So I was like, this is interesting. You know what I mean? So So basically, I'm not one of those crazy, like, hardline guys. I just definitely have my belief system, and just want to kind of see where people are maybe, years later, that maybe have changed their ideas, maybe would do things differently. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
So for, maybe people that are watching the show that maybe aren't familiar, because I have a lot of friends that have never listened to Christian metal, and when I've thrown, albums and whatnot, people are like, wow, I didn't know that these bands could be Christian. I'm like, and it's not like this stuff happened yesterday, man. Some of these bands were 30 years old now that were groundbreaking,
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting when people are like, there's no way that could be a Christian band. I'm like, yeah, it is, and I always get that question. People ask, well, why do you listen to it? I'm like, just because I don't believe in God doesn't mean it's not good music. I like Deicide.
Music is music,
Yeah, I like Deicide. I don't believe in the devil. You know what I mean? So why would I limit myself? If it's good music, it's good music. So first question is, just give me a little brief rundown for people that might know what Deliverance is or was, and just kind of the year it started, how, like, when it first started, like, what was your game plan with getting Deliverance going?
Okay, well, I mean, for people, just to break it down as easy as possible, I started the band when I was 15 in 1985. We just like anybody and everybody else that, especially, a young rebellious teenager, I was in I belonged to a Pentecostal church. And so to have this kid with I was the only kid with long hair. I was the only kid who listened to metal and other types of music. And I was very open about the fact that I listened to secular music. I was not one of those who shied away from the fact that, there's great music in every genre and every facet.
Yeah.
And so, I had my fights with Christians and with pastors and everything else. But when I started Deliverance, I did it because, I enjoyed what was going on. I mean, I started going to concerts in 79, 1980, that were Christian concerts, at Calvary Chapel, and was really, really into a band called DA, Daniel Amos.
Oh yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah, love Randy Stonehill, of course, then I discovered Res Band and Resurrection Man. I thought, oh wow, these guys are heavy,
That was Terry Taylor's band, wasn't it?
I'm sorry?
Was that Terry Taylor's band?
Terry Taylor's band was Daniel Amos, DA. Okay. Yeah. And Res Band is Glenn and Wendy Kaiser.
That's right.
So I just was realizing, wow, there's some heavy stuff out there. It's cool, but most of it blues based, which is fine. And then of course, you find yourself kind of trapped going to all these, Christian shows because your parents are, my whole family had converted. And so it's like, those are the only shows you're allowed to go to. So the other shows, I'll never forget when I had to sneak away and say we were going to a Calvary Chapel show. And we actually went to go see, I forgot what the name of it. It was a big show, but it was Foreigner, Scorpions, and who was the other band? Loverboy.
Okay.
And of all bands to open the show, Iron Maiden.
Oh, nice.
And it was with Paul Di'Anno.
Oh, nice.
So it was cool. This was 81, I think, 81 or 82. Yeah. But it was Summer Strut Tour. That's what it was called, the Summer Strut Tour. And I just remember, I was there. I wanted to see, Foreigner. I heard they blew up a huge jukebox and for Jukebox Hero, and I wanted to see that and everything. But I discovered Maiden. I was just like, oh my gosh, these guys are amazing. And Di'Anno just was super cool to me. Bruce Dickinson obviously took it to a whole other level, but Di'Anno was cool in his own vibe, his own way. Especially,
it's a fantastic record.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So, but I definitely saw, and I was one of those weird kids because, see, I would go to a show like that, and then I would go to Human League or Missing Persons, or I loved the opposite side of the spectrum too. I grew up listening to a whole diverse blend of music in my household. From Elvis to Bowie to Pink Floyd to Zeppelin to mariachi music because of my Hispanic roots, and it's hilarious. I just never forsook that, and I loved listening on that stuff.
But what really drew you to the metal, especially being 85? Especially speed and thrash, because 81 you have Slayer, you have Metallica. They're really the groundbreakers.
Well, I'm going to all these concerts, I'm listening to all this other stuff now. I would love to be in a synth pop type band. I was really into Gary Newman and everything else, but synthesizers were super expensive.
Yeah.
And so I took up guitar, and I took up guitar very early. In fact, everybody laughs at the very first story that I learned to play on a stolen Les Paul that my brother had stolen and stashed under my bed, and they forgot they'd left it there, and that's how I learned to play around 11, 12 years old. So, but I really was obviously, really, really taken aback with the heavy guitar sounds, Gilmour, Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix. But man, when I heard EVH, Eddie Van Halen, man, rest in peace, man, I was just like, whoa, this was something else. So I got really into that heavy playing and that heavy distortion and a lot of groove. And, everybody always marveled at Eddie's lead and solo technique, but what nobody really realized is that Eddie was a phenomenal and just unbelievable rhythm player, just could carry a rhythm and had a great rhythm style. And that's what I picked up on a lot. And so as metal started to grow, and you started seeing more and more metal shirts at junior high school, and I'm going to school, and you're seeing Maiden shirts and Scorpions, Blackout, and everything else. I want to start listening to this stuff, and I'll never forget. I had this Korean friend, he really quiet kid, but he had a Walkman. He was one of the first to have a Sony Walkman. He had and he goes, hey, come listen to this, James, and sticks the headphones on me, and I hear this big intro on drums, and it was Over the Mountain. Okay. And I was like, oh my gosh, who is this? And he's like, it's Ozzy. And I'm like, oh, wow. And I just remember listening to that tone and listening to that vibe and thought it was so great. So now again, trying to be a good boy, going to strictly Christian concerts, but I'm going to the secular ones on the side. Yeah. But then I wanted to maintain. And so now, who was the big super band that came out that was metal? Stryper.
Yeah.
And now, of course, we went to the shows, we saw them do their thing, and there's no question that they just exuded professionalism. Yes. There was no Christian band that was that professional.
Well, I always put Stryper like in the gateway drug to metal for Christian metal.
Oh yeah.
Like before Stryper, I mean, speaking of your synth bands, I mean, the only band, like I grew up listening to, my sister loved, Depeche Mode and.
Same here, yeah.
I mean, that I have that secret.
You heard it all too.
I'd sit in my sister's bedroom when she'd be listening, to Morrissey or something. I'm like, oh, I like this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I have a big goth soft spot in my heart.
Oh yeah, dude. I grew up listening to the Smiths, Morrissey, of course, and Depeche Mode, and of course, then the Vince Clarke split off with Erasure, and it's funny, but
that new wave of British pop stuff. But I mean,
it's such good stuff.
Real show was, I was like 8, and we lived in Denver at the time before we moved to California, and we went and saw Steve Taylor with Sheila Walsh.
Oh yeah.
And I was gonna say, when you were talking about synth and whatnot, like when you guys did the
on the Fritz,
yeah. Oh, killer, so good, And I still listen to Steve to this day. I mean,
oh yeah,
some of his music, he's just music that's brilliant is just brilliant, no matter what.
Oh, my favorite stuff Steve did is when he did the Chagall Guevara stuff, man.
Really?
Oh man, I love it. I mean, I love all of Steve's stuff, but I really dug Chagall Guevara, and that was his first breakout into the secular world. Nobody really knew Steve Taylor as Steve Taylor. I want to be a clone. That they were getting to see a whole new side. So, but I remember being intrigued by Stryper, and then I got to meet Robert and Michael, and they were really nice guys and stuff. But what I couldn't gel with was, because I've always been a heavy dude. I mean, so I wasn't going to look right dressed as a fat girl, So, but then I would see, and I brought up the Maiden thing because they were the antithesis of a metal look, especially what was coming. Because Priest had the leather, and it's so funny. Later, many years later, we realized the leather bondage look, but and there was a reason why. But
I got that when I was a kid. I was like,
yeah.
I don't care, but I was like, he's dressing a little bit kind of like in a police academy when they go to the Blue Oyster.
Yes, exactly. When they go to that bar, the Blue Oyster.
Like, Alfred's got a hell of a voice anyway, but still,
Yeah, I know. But but Maiden, just had the jeans, t-shirt, and a leather jacket. I thought, man, what a great look. What a cool vibe. And Stryper, let's face it, dude, Yellow and Black Attack came and blew your face off. It was true LA scene metal at the time, 1983. It was good pro, it was real. Then Soldiers came out, way polished, super polished, and definitely got more pretty boy, and it started to change, but it was still good and it was still heavy. But after that, to hell with the devil and God we trust, they went so bubblegum, it was ridiculous.
I mean, they were doing the LA strip, Poison Warrant,
and I get it. I get it, but I know by the time in 84, 85, we were kind of like wanting something different. And I'd started seeing other bands like Barren Cross and Neon Cross. And Neon Cross didn't do the spandex and all that other stuff. Barren Cross, of course, did in the beginning. But I wanted to see something different. And then I was introduced to, of course, Metallica, and I really loved Sabbath and really loved especially the Heaven and Hell album, all the Ronnie James Dio years, and I was just like, oh man, this is just awesome. So I started to write in that vein, but I couldn't sing, obviously, like Dio, and I really loved Michael Sweet's voice, but I wanted to do heavy music, but with melodic vocals, and that was where Deliverance was born, because it was trying to capture the heavy music and then stick melodic vocals on top of it, but keep the music heavy. And then by the time Ride the Lightning came into the picture for me, when I first heard it, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is the new wave. This is where it's going to go. This is the future of metal. And lo and behold, it was. And that's why we started doing what we were doing. And we were playing, the strip, Gazaris, the Troubadour, the Whiskey, the Roxy, and I'm doing this all as a 16-year-old kid, having to wait in the alley until showtime because they won't let me in the club. It was hilarious, but it was great. We got a lot of exposure, but then all of a sudden, there's all these other Christian metal bands that we started getting lumped in, because at first we were playing like with Dark Angel and that was one show we got booked to show it with the Whiskey with Jane's Addiction and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden we just started getting lumped into the Christian metal shows. And I remember my biggest fight with it was because we were, the first 4 years are what I call the ministry years, because we were trying to be reach the lost type of band. And but when you go from playing to 100% non-Christian crowds to now it's 50%, now it's 70%, now it's 95%, and there's hardly any non-Christians there, and you're up there preaching hellfire brimstone, and you're just preaching to the choir, and that's the absolute truth. So the Christian metal scene started evolving and changing and turning into its own scene. It was its own subgenre inside of a subgenre already.
Well, especially in Southern California, because there was you guys, there was Vengeance, there was Tourniquet. You had the Crucified, which I don't consider them a metal band. I've always considered them a hardcore punk band.
They're a punk, yeah. They're a punk, I consider them thrashy, kind of thrashy punk, yeah.
Yeah, but they were never the metal. You know what I mean? They definitely had the because I was just gonna ask you with the other bands, especially with the LA punk scene going on, did you dig any the Suicidal Tendencies?
Oh yeah, we played a backyard party with Suicidal. It was awesome.
This is being a Christian band.
Oh yeah. This was 1986. Played a backyard party in Venice Beach. It was great, with opening for Suicidal. Nice. And we were getting all sorts of cool gigs like this. That's why it was really strange, like I said, when the whole genre of Christian thrash, Christian metal, because see, when we were doing it all, Larry Farkas was with us, and then he left us in 1987 to go with Vengeance, because Vengeance had just started and they needed Larry, because Larry was the writer and Larry's Larry, Yeah. He's what made Vengeance for me, him and Roger, Yeah. Although I don't discount the boys either. Doug's a great songwriter. In fact, some of their killer songs like Burn, I always thought Larry wrote those, and Larry's, he was here a couple of months ago and he was like, no dude, Doug wrote that. I'm like, oh okay, I didn't know
too. Glenn was a hell of a drummer.
Oh, Glenn. Now if you heard Glenn just play like the way he's supposed to play, that John Bonham groove and in the pocket, that's the Glenn I know, man. The speed metal guy was not Glenn. The just in the pocket groove, I guess like what Die Happy was, but but so once 87 came, that's when all the shows started coming. And then 89, we heard about this band Tourniquet. Now, I went to go see Crucified in 85 because I thought we were the very first Christian speed metal thrash band, you know? Then I heard, no, there's another one. There's one in Fresno. And I'm like, really? Those hicks over there have, good music? Like, no. And so I actually got my sister to take me to a show. And when I saw them, I was like, oh no, these guys are punk. It's all good. And but I made the connection immediately with Jim Chaffin, who obviously is still like one of my best friends to this day. And he's sick. Yeah. Have you heard Subversive Kind?
Yeah.
Oh, dude, he is so good on that. But anyways, but I realized, okay, so they're not that, And then, about, I think it was 86 or 87, we heard about a band called Believer starting in Chicago. And then, then we obviously had Vengeance, but we thought we were like the last of the Mohicans. And then we just started meeting other bands. And then Tourniquet came along in '89. I'll never forget when I first met them. They were called Holy Danger. And do you remember that?
No, I did not know that.
Oh, really? Yeah. They were called Holy Danger. And then they got Ted in the band, and Ted changed it to Tourniquet, and it just kind of like went a different direction, which was a good thing. Because it was kind of strange as Holy Danger. That was Guy Ritter and Gary Lanier, but so it was just a different time. And we went all the way until '96. We got signed, and then once we got signed, that was the hardest part, because we really, really wanted to sign to a secular label, and we didn't want a Christian. I did not want to be signed to a Christian label, because I didn't want to be like subcategorized and locked into this box. And more importantly, how do you get people to go to a Christian bookstore to buy your music? Because it was too hard to get, into Warehouse Records or Licorice Pizza or whatever.
Tower Records.
Sam Goody, Tower Records. Yeah. So, I mean, it was like, and when you get stuck on a Christian record, that label, that's what happens. That's where Stryper did it right. Stryper signed with Enigma.
Yeah.
But
see this about the label, because I mean, this was a question I was going to bring up. What did the label? Was it more of were you guys just basically a commodity to make money, or did they believe in the ministry aspect of what you were doing?
Oh, no. Now, when they lure you in and they bring you into the thing, it's funny. I got to say this is the best part about Frontline Records or Intense Records. Mm-hmm. It was owned by Frontline. Yeah. Frontline actually approached us in 1987 to sign us. We said no. Okay. And then they approached us in '88 and we said no. And then we signed with Intense Records in Chicago. Now, Intense was Caesar Kalinowski. Mm-hmm. He had secular distribution. He wanted to pretty much kind of run it like a secular label, but signed but nothing but Christian thrash bands. So we signed with them. He ends up running out of money. We didn't get to record. All of a sudden, we get a recording date, and he lets me know the bad news that I had to sell the label. And I'm like, well, who'd you sell it to? And he's like, Frontline Records. I'm like, oh, great. So we ended up on Frontline anyway.
Yeah.
But, I ended up having a good relationship with them, but I learned very quickly that we were the alternative too. Mm-hmm. So, since every church, every kid indoctrinated into Christianity and, okay, burn your secular records, burn your secular t-shirts. Mm-hmm. And now here's the good news, kids. Did you love Metallica? Because here's the equivalent.
Exactly.
Deliverance. Did you love Slayer? Yep. We got the equivalent. Vengeance Rising. Yeah. Did you love this? It's this, everything.
Exactly. I mean, that's the era I grew up in listening. It's like, if you like Carcass, listen to Tourniquet. You know what I mean? Yeah. If you like, Morbid Angel, listen to Mortification. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So right.
There was always those kind of like, when you brought up Believer the other day, or just a moment ago, this was kind of a problem as a Christian, as a kid, he was a skateboarder, surfer, because I grew up in Ventura, and before getting to go to LA for shows, luckily I grew up around Ill Repute and Dr. No and Aggression. So I got to go to a lot of punk shows.
Oh, yeah.
In Ventura. So
you were going to all the Golden Voice shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on. I went to a lot of those, man.
So, and that's the thing. And then, punk just kind of ran its course. And then I found, again, early on in my youth, found Stryper and Barren Cross and White Cross, and the list goes on, Bride and all those bands. But, sure. It's like when I first heard Scum in 86, 87, that's what changed it. I was like, Napalm Death, Scum. I was like, who is this? Yeah. And then I started trying to find, more intense, more aggressive, crazier music. But again, I had a very, very crazy Christian mother who, snag your tapes, break them,
oh yeah,
serious punishment if you brought that in the house, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Just like you're grounded, but serious punishment, I like you said, the church, the tape burning, she found I had a Master of Puppets, and the one that really freaked her out was South of Heaven, you know.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
And, I mean, I remember, going to the youth group and, having to, outside and burning the cassettes, and the preachers, the demons are coming out of it. And this is my question on that is, I mean, even how do I word it without sounding crass? It's very Gestapo. You know what I mean? As I've gotten older, looking around, it's like very, like, when the Nazis were throwing away literature they thought was inappropriate.
Yeah, the book burnings. Yeah.
Yeah, the book burnings, art, literature, and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of those things. Did you agree with that kind of stuff at that time? Did you really think that would make a difference?
No, I didn't. I was really mad when they came into my room and took all my stuff away.
Yeah.
And the reason being, as I said, this has nothing to do, even as a 10-year-old, I said, this has nothing to do with my having a relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
This is just simply music. If we start trapping ourselves into this little tiny cocoon in this little bubble, and we only go to Christian doctors and Christian car sales lots and Christian dentists and Christian chiropractors and Christian sofa sales people, and we're all of a sudden going to limit ourselves. We're going to lock ourselves away into this little glass asylum, and we're going to convince ourselves that we are locking ourselves away from sin, and we're not. And in fact, shouldn't we be out amongst them all? Because that's what Jesus was. Jesus hung out with the undesirables, as it were, of his day, and because that's what he was there for. He said the sick are the ones that need a doctor, not the well. Yeah. And in other words, that those analogies all to say that you can't hide away from it all. And it seemed like that's what they wanted people to do. Now, if you yourself made a decision within yourself, I'm not going to do this because I don't want to, I don't feel it's good for me, that's one thing. And don't inflict it onto anybody else. But when you start just really, really, like you said, Gestapo, you just kind of take this approach where you mandate things to people and say, this is the way you have to live your life, or you are in sin. That's when it starts to become a problem, because the scripture is very clear about what sin is. It just says, to him that knows to do right and he doesn't do it, then that's sin. So, and that could be with anything. So, and that's why Paul said, I can do anything. All things are lawful for me. It's just not all good things are good for me. So you have to know what is and regulate things for yourself. So I never had a problem with secular music or just music in general, because I always saw it for what it was. I remember reading Keith Green talk about it.
Oh, and I loved him. Amazing piano player. Amazing piano player.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable. Taken way too soon.
Did he plane crash or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plane crash. Very young. But I remember him in an article talking about, do you listen to secular music? And he said, absolutely. And he says, I see music as a scalpel. A scalpel, it can really inflict some major damage on somebody if you use it as a weapon, but in a surgery, it can be used to save a life. So music is the scalpel. And so it's how it's used. So but he goes, there's tons of beautiful songwriters out there that may not know the Lord, but it doesn't mean that they're not being used of God, because they are practicing this very spiritual art called music. Mm-hmm. So, and when I read that, I remember reading that and going, my gosh, this is exactly what I've been feeling for years. And I thought that was just amazing. And so I guess I've just always had a different view of it all,
So
yeah.
at your age right now, I mean, I don't want to use the word like devout, you know what I mean? But I mean, are you still active in the church? I mean, do you still?
No. I like to say that where modern day Christianity has come, I am not a Christian.
Okay.
Where it is and what, and I'm not talking about like the last 5 years.
No. Yeah.
I'm talking about the last 100 years
Yeah, exactly.
of where it's been, because it's not, they don't practice what Jesus really intended.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you show me, you know, it's like I remember always telling people, you know what I love? I love the preacher that has his general store like in the old days, and that's what he does for a living. And then every Sunday and Thursday he goes and he preaches at the church.
Yeah.
But otherwise he doesn't depend on the people. He doesn't treat them with all these sermons of sin if you don't give, and you have to give 1/10 of your salary, which that scripture is totally not applicable to the Christian church. Research it. I always tell people, research that because it's not applicable. And you know, when people start doing that, then it turns into a control issue. And once it's a control issue, then anything and everything that Jesus taught, preached, and exercised in his own life and his own ministry goes right out the window.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's all been, man. And that's why we've seen the rise and fall of where everything is. So I started down my own journey of different studies and everything else years and years ago. Yeah. And, you know, I studied Judaism, I studied Buddhism, I really loved Kabbalah, which is esotericism of offshoot of Judaism.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to explore, and especially as a Christian, it's weird saying I'm a Christian, but I don't know anything about Judaism. And the man we say we worship was an actual practicing Jew, bar mitzvahed and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And was obviously a rabbi, because nobody was just called that. You had to actually go to rabbinical school to be called rabbi and wear the seamless robe and all of that. So in other words, he went through the whole 9 yards and the whole gambit, man, to get to where he was at. That's why when he began his ministry at 30, he'd already went through it. So you look at that, and I thought to myself, you know, I don't know anything about the actual religion. And then obviously my father is Jewish, or his family's Jewish. Mm-hmm. So he was not a practicing Jew, but the Hebrew blood is in there. So I became very, very interested and wanted to know. Mm-hmm. And when I started to really, really learn, I wanted to learn Hebrew, I wanted to learn Greek, I wanted to learn Aramaic, so that way I could really, really see, because having grown up in a bilingual household, speaking Spanish and English, mm-hmm. there's so much lost in the translation. And as I started to learn other languages, French and everything else, there is so much lost in the translation. So I started to really wonder, you know, is stuff getting lost in translation with the English Bible that we're reading? And that's why I went on this quest for years and started learning and wanting to understand, and started studying under rabbis, and started studying, you know, went and studied Talmudic study and Kabbalah. And like I said, it was in a remarkable time, but it changed my view of everything out there. And especially coming back to the Christian setting, it really, really changed my view of how remarkably backwards everybody keeps going. Instead of progressing and moving forward, they want to keep going backwards, and they think they're moving forward, but they're not.
Well, the same thing we're seeing, you know, we've seen it comes in waves, you know, especially, you know, in the 80s, you know, with the whole satanic panic stuff and all the
of course, yeah.
And whatnot. And then, you know, up until today with the crazy QAnon people thinking, you know, there's a satanic, you know, under a pizza parlor sucking baby blood, you know what I mean?
Right.
But that's the problem too.
It's the new satanic panic, yeah, with that.
But I think the problem is, therefore, you know, especially with the churches, I think they like keeping people in fear. I think they like keeping people scared. I think that, you know, I asked my mom this one time. I'm like, why do we have to go every Sunday? And she goes, well, because it's a Sabbath. But as getting older and whatnot, the Bible says just to observe the Sabbath. It has nothing to do with going to church, But you get them young, you make them go once a week. It keeps that brainwashing going and going until you are fully indoctrinated.
Sure.
And I really have no issue about what Jesus said per se about, like love thy brother or whatnot. But if you really take a look at and read the Bible, and this is from my personal perspective, if the old God of Jehovah, he was a bastard. He was not a good God. You know what I mean? I mean,
I heard it put once and it made me laugh, was Louis Black, the comedian, he said, he goes, God, angry, just always grouchy for no reason, killing people. And this city's pissing me off. I'm going to burn them and blah, blah, blah. Then he has a kid, mellows out, starts to like people, And it's totally true, though. If you look at it from that perspective, it looks really, really funny because it's like, yeah, he has a kid, he mellows out,
Well, it's just been interesting. Like you said, you've been, studying, I've done studying Hinduism and again, Buddhism and whatnot.
Sure. Same here. Yeah.
And, that's the thing. Even this this geologist from Israel came out with a study about 6-7 years ago where he was looking for, evidence of slavery in Egypt when they escaped,
Right.
And he wrote, and this is a Jewish guy who is from Israel, basically wrote a paper saying this never happened. This is a story.
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
And I understand the allegorical part of, learning a lesson through story and whatnot, Grimm's fairy tales, all that kind of stuff. But how does it get from such a, just maybe, just some advice on life to this, I mean, we're gonna, you're going to hell, we are right, we have the answer, I mean, where does that come from?
It comes from control. It's control. This is I'll never forget. I sat. It was my first lesson with a rabbi in San Diego. I was living out in North County at the time, and I only had one day off a week. I was working at Guitar Center, and I would go and I would spend 4 hours with him.
Nice.
And my first lesson, he finally agreed to take me as a student. It took me a long time to convince him.
Yeah.
Because number one, they like Jews that your mom was Jewish. When your dad was Jewish, it doesn't count.
Yeah, you're not really.
And it's funny. What's funny is like 300 years ago, that wasn't so, but now it is. But they used to want to take it from your dad's side, hence why you were called, Yeshua ben Joseph. You were named after your dad. But anyway, all that aside, he finally took me and he did his homework on me. He found out my background, everything else, and so we sit down, and he goes, "Okay, I know all about your years of Christianity, your defense of the faith, and all of this." And he goes, "And that's fantastic and everything. But now I want you to do me a favor." And he goes, and he slides over the Torah to me, and he opens his book, and I open my book, and he goes, "Put your hand on there, and I want you to realize that," or not realize, he goes, "I want you to see everything here as not actual, but allegory."
Thank you.
I don't want you to look at the creation story as actually having happened this way. I want you to see it as allegory. I don't want you to see how God made man as actual, but allegory. And he goes, and once you can free your mind to see these words as that, then you will begin to learn.
Okay.
He goes, so that's lesson one, goodbye. And he sent me away for a week to think about it.
Yeah.
And that, I'm not going to lie, having come from the background of Christian faith, and this is the absolute inherent word of God, 100% solid truth. There is, and now I'm being taught by our Rebbe I want you to think and look at all of this as nothing but allegory, because, and then this was now I returned the second time, and he goes, and we started to talk about Adam, Eve. He told me what their names meant. And he says, you see, whether they existed or not doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether these people existed. What are you getting from the story? What are you learning that's going to be applicable to your life, that's going to change and transform you into a living vessel of light? And I'm just like, whoa. Okay, so it doesn't matter. He's like, it doesn't matter. That's the thing. People get hung up on Noah and Moses and this and that, and you guys are missing the points of the story. And he goes, and he goes, I don't know a lot of your Christianity. He goes, but I know it's the same for Jesus. People are missing the points. He goes, I do know this about Christianity, that there's 4 books completely dedicated to Jesus. The rest of it's all Paul and Peter and all the disciples. And you guys are living according to their words and not really to the words of the guy you call your Messiah.
Well, NIV, they even have a little, apostrophe saying, like, they don't know who wrote the 4 books of the New Testament. Matthew.
Oh, the Gospels. Yeah, the Gospels. Yeah.
They're like, because that's the thing. Yeah. You would know this, studying with the rabbi,
Sure.
Back then it was all taught through oral stories and memorization.
Yes.
I mean? So it would be this story told down to this story to this person,
Oh yeah. Man.
That's where I think Christians have it so hardlined, and to where it's actually not only in my opinion a detriment to growth of humanity, but also it's just blind devotion to anything is not healthy in any way, shape, or form. You know what I mean?
Well, I think you just I mean, my thing is this, just like I have a dear friend, obviously, and I'm sure he doesn't mind my saying his name. He played in Deliverance, Brian Carilla.
Yeah.
He was our bass player and is now an atheist. And I never asked him why. I never asked him why he chose this route. I never asked him, or tried to convince him otherwise.
Yeah.
Because Brian was first and foremost my friend.
Exactly.
And the biggest thing that you can offer to any friend is unconditional love.
Definitely.
And if my condition for loving him was the fact that he had to practice the same faith as me, well, then that doesn't make me a good friend.
Exactly. But then seeing it as a better way of seeing it is friendship first, and then everything else. You know what I mean? Instead of most people saying, "I can't be around you, I can't be your friend because you don't believe the same thing I do."
That part's never made sense to me. But I remember exploring atheism. I explored, I started studying everything from a scientific a point of view, and completely trying to see the cosmos as the molecular build that it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the more and more I saw the perfection in it, the perfection in the accident, I had to think, regardless of what I believe the architect is, there has to be an architect, because nothing is ever an accident. And like I said, it could be aliens for all we know. I don't know. I mean, you know what I mean? But there's a grand design to it all, to the shedding of cells that we are constantly shedding, and the bacteria and viruses that are constantly floating in the air that we're breathing in and exhaling, and all this other stuff. It's this unbelievable, perfect song and dance that's always going on, and there has to be some sort of architecture behind it. And when there is an architecture behind it, and we all agree that there is, science agrees that, then you have to agree that something made it. To say that the Big Bang just happened, there's got to be more to it. So whatever the bend is, I've always said to myself and to others, whatever your bend is, philosophically, religious, whatever, we can all agree that throughout all the crap it's still a pretty cool place. The universe, I'm talking as far as the universe in general. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty brilliant. It's frightening. It's scary. I've always likened God to the ocean. And the reason I liken God to the ocean is because it's mysterious. We don't even have a clue what's underneath, how far it goes down, how deep it goes down, and what creatures live there. You know, we have no idea, and it's frightening. It's not like this welcoming place of darkness. It's scary to a lot of people. To me, I'm attracted to it. I love it. I look at it and I go, oh my gosh. That's what's cool about it, but it nonetheless is huge, vast, and gigantic. And we are merely, when that ocean, you know how when you go to the ocean and the wave comes and it crashes, and all those billions of little tiny droplets that hit the sand, that's us.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's like, to the vastness of what it is, God is compared to what we are. Whoa, it's some big, deep stuff. And man, we could actually sit for 3, 4, 5 hours and just talk about that.
You know, my wife, I have an affinity to water and to the ocean, especially growing up.
Same here.
You know, I feel better when I'm in the water. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, same here, man.
I love swimming. I love, you know, growing up, you know, boogie boarding and surfing and all that stuff. You know, too bad I live in the middle of Kansas now, so I don't get to do it as often. You know. Well, let me ask you this, and especially with your guys' big breakout, you know, basically I consider Weapons your monster, you know, your Black Album. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You know, especially knowing now, kind of in an allegorical, you know, kind of setting, how your rabbi was talking about. Do you ever at times sit back and go, man, I maybe wish I wouldn't have written it in the literal? You know what I mean? Written songs in the literal. You know?
Sure. Well, you know, actually, there was a time I went and I looked back, and I especially look at songs like No Time, and you know, God opened up his book and said, your name I cannot find. I was going to write it down, but I couldn't find the time. I think to myself, I start laughing. I'm like, wow, what a infantile mind that would write that. But it's okay, because that is growth, right? I mean, what's the old saying? What is Nietzsche? You know, you crawl, then you walk, then you walk, then you run, and you know, and so I like looking at my past albums as just a continuous part of growth. It just, there's always some level of growth. And I know once I hit Stay of Execution is when I started to really look and start wanting to write in a more, dare I say, romantic, more poetic way about seeing God and the relationship between God and man, as opposed to just, you know, weapons of our warfare aren't carnal, you know. Or I remember thinking to myself as I sat and I penned a lyric and said, give me the heart of Jesus, loving. And then I was like, and Terry, my producer, said, think poetically. Don't just say it literal and try to lift it from the scriptures. Think poetically. And I thought to myself, give me the heart of the nail-torn lover. And I'm like, that's just a better way of painting it. And it made me start using my brain and using my head, as opposed to just mindlessly quoting scripture in my lyrics. It made me start trying to use this gift of putting stuff together and saying, okay, well, now I want to be an artist with what I do. I look at Francis Schaeffer. He said, you don't have to paint pictures of crucifixes and biblical scenes and all this other stuff to get your point across of what God is and what the gospel story is. It could be it could be an apple and can display so much of what the wonders of God, as opposed to having to make everything so religious. And that's what changed me, man. That's what changed my idea of how things can and should be. So when I look at Weapons, or when I look at the first album, or Greetings, or any of that stuff, I think to myself, well, it was all growth pattern, you know? And it's the only thing that sucks about it, because you said, as you stated, it was a breakout record, so it's my most popular. So people keep thinking I'm Jimmy of 1990, and it's like, yeah, I'm not. It's 2021.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, let me ask you, did you get a lot of flack from or pressure from your label, because you are a Christian band? Did they ever double check your work? No, this has to be more Christian. There needs to be 25 references of Jesus in your album. It needs to be this. So did you guys have pretty much free reign to do whatever you want?
I'll tell you, the funny thing about it, I didn't want to be signed by that label.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's complaint walking away from that label is, we never got paid. We got ripped off. We got screwed. They treated us like crap. You're going to meet one guy right here that is going to tell you, I always got paid. Whenever I needed money, they always made sure to give it to me. When I wanted bigger budgets, they gave them to me. And they trusted me, and they encouraged my growth as an artist. They didn't, because I remember going into their meeting once. It was right before, it was when I wanted Terry Taylor to produce us. And I told him, I want to grow. And Terry Taylor said he can make me the Bowie of metal. And that's what I want to be. Yeah. And they were like, go for it, man. Good for you.
You had support from them. You had encouragement. You actually had people that believed in what you were doing. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. They already knew that, even though I used profanity in my regular speech, they knew I was never gonna put that out on a record.
Yeah.
They knew that if I was in a moment of doubt, whether it was my faith or my walk or whatever, they knew I would never write negatively about it, but that I would always write about it in a heart that says, but this is what I want to be. See, I was never bashful about saying, man, I'm going through a lot of crap right now, emotionally, physically, mentally, but I really want to be here. Mm-hmm. And so, in other words, I'm always wanting to grow. Mm-hmm. And people can say that's attaining righteousness or attaining Christ. People, again, depending on your bill, or attaining enlightenment, or attaining the tree of life, however you want to say it, or just growing and maturing as a human being. But I always tried to do that through my music, and our A&R guy over at the label just encouraged it. He loved that I just had a very open heart and open mind towards all of these different things. Nice. And so I never got any crap. In fact, when I signed with the big one, which was Word Records.
Word, yeah.
I was so excited. I was thrilled. And they gave me the biggest budget I'd ever had.
Nice.
And then they shelved the record.
Which
never even released it. River Disturbance.
Oh, yeah, okay.
They shelved it.
Huh.
And the production company who I was working with, Brainstorm Artist International, Gene Eugene, and Ojo Taylor, just said, we're going to put it out. We're going to scrape all our money together, and because this is a good record. We want it out there. And we only printed up 15,000 copies, but we got it out there. And then they gave me the rights to the album.
Nice.
So it was 100% mine. But that showed me what it's like working with a biggie, with a major label. And you know what their reason was? They said, we don't know how to market this.
Yeah.
How could you not know how to market? It was just a good hard rock metal album.
Yeah. Well, River came out, 97, 98?
Oh, 94.
94, okay.
Yeah.
Easy market, alternative, especially at that time when...
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing. It's kind of like, the hair metal scene, boom, it's dead. You know what I mean? Yeah. Then we have the extreme, metal scene that's coming in and really, getting steam on that, especially when you guys got to have your video on MTV's Headbangers Ball.
Yeah, 91. Yeah, that was big.
That's funny because I was living in Ventura at the time, but we had moved to Colorado Springs at the time. And I had met George. Me and George used to talk when I was a kid or a teenager all the time. I met him at Sanctuary, and he gave me his phone number. I gave him mine, and he would call me, and we would just shoot the stuff about Christianity, music, and whatnot. So
Sure.
I had just moved to Colorado Springs, and he had called me and said, "Hey, the video is going to be on this time, Headbangers Ball. You need to check it out." I'm like, "Awesome." And this is where I kind of just really started having a problem, especially with Christians. I'd already disliked a lot of because at that time we were going to Ted Haggard's church in Colorado Springs, if you know that name.
I don't know who Ted Haggard is.
He was that evangelical back in about 10 years ago that had the gay relationship all over the news.
Oh. Well, there's so many that do. So
he was a spiritual advisor to George W. Bush. He was the leader of the evangelicals. I mean, we're talking the mega church, you know what I mean?
Wow.
And so I remember we were at this youth group, and was talking to my youth pastor. I'm like, "Hey, my friend's band is metal, and I know you guys don't like metal, but I want you to check him out, And he was like, he would, he was not having it. And I had to just persist him. I'm like, "Look, man, just check it out. These guys are Christians. I know this guy, So, and of course it's on Headbangers Ball. And he was already just kind of like, "I don't put that on in my home, He finally, was like, "All right." I'm like, "Dude, I got to watch this video. I'm going to watch this video, And so we turned it on. The time came, you guys' weapons, video came on, cool video. And we got done. And I was just like, "What do you think, man?" And I was really kind of pushing for, Christian metal at the time. I was 13 at the time, so, and just, I remember him going, "That was horrible. That's not godly at all." And I'm like, "Who are you people to judge? You don't even know this just because it's more loud and there's, long hair and whatnot." You know what I mean? And that was kind of like the first realizations of, man, you guys don't love, you know what I mean? You guys are the judgment shouldn't be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Church to me was always we grew up very poor, you know what I mean? We didn't have a lot of money. And so, I always remember going to church and the football players are over here, you know what I mean? The well,
sure, yeah.
The money's over here, and that's who the preachers like to.
Oh, yeah.
"Well, let's have lunch together, where you guys are here just to make numbers," you know what I mean? So
well, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
The people, you start seeing. I'll give you a great example. I'll never forget, because I was 14 or I was 15 or 16 when it happened. But a converted Messianic Jewish family had started attending the church I was going, and they decided to enroll in membership and join, and they just loved our pastor, and they owned several construction companies in Los Angeles, and big bucks, which meant huge 10%, right?
Oh, yeah.
Plus, remember, it's never just tithes; it's tithes and offerings.
Exactly.
So, well, it moved. All of a sudden, our senior pastor starts preaching these sermons because they're Jewish. I mean, one, he decided to go ahead and spend a whole sermon about famous Jews, and
my favorite.
It started citing Christopher Columbus was a Jew, and I mean, and all these questionable, where are you getting your information, dude? I mean, it's Bugs Bunny's more of a Jew because of Mel Blanc than Christopher Columbus. I mean, it was really weird, but you had to cater.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did. That's what I don't like about the modern day church, is they do all this catering crap because they got to keep the constituents happy. It's like politics. You got to keep the parishioners happy. And because they're the main givers, and the rest of you turds that, your 10% is only $120 a month, well, God bless you, and we love you too, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
But this guy's 10% is $45,000 a month.
Exactly.
And dude, when you start seeing that stuff, and see, my brother was associate pastor of that church, and I was in the inner workings. I always knew what was going on behind the scenes, and I grew up like that. And then especially once I started getting to meet all these other Christian musicians and finding out, like, oh wow, these guys are, I mean, when I hung out with Dark Angel, I felt like they were more Christian than some of these Christian bands.
And I was going to ask later on is, like, I mean, how many of these bands were like, just, you know, they just should have just been a band instead of trying to be a ministry? So that's always been my problem. When people say ministry, then they have their hands out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, like, I truly believe if it's a ministry, it should be for free. You shouldn't be charging for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you know, I'll tell you, and I have no problem with a band saying that they're a band, because, you know, I always was scared to call us a ministry because of the fact that when you use that word, and I got to give you this story. In fact, I shared this with my wife yesterday. It was something I learned about Stan Laurel, you know, Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
Stan Laurel was an Englishman, and a lot of people didn't know that because he didn't hardly speak, right? It was all Hardy beating him up all the time.
I've seen the movie where John C. Reilly plays Hardy.
Oh, I never saw that. No.
Great movie, yeah.
Is it awesome?
It's amazing.
I'll have to look into that. Well, this is something I learned about Laurel, is that he kept his name in the phone book and his address. And people would come to his house at all hours of the day, night, and call him on the phone, and he welcomed them. He would serve tea and biscuits. He would sometimes take them down the street where there was a little park if there was too many that he couldn't fit into his flat. He loved being around the people. And when they told him, dude, you're a megastar, you can't do this, you have to create your private life has to be separate from your professional life, why are you doing this? And he says, well, if I'm just simply going to entertain them, but I can't be there for them, well, then what good is my entertainment?
True. See,
and I thought to myself, gosh, that's ministry.
Yeah.
I mean, that really is, man.
Actually, you know, the point that I was going to make with meeting George is there was never errors. He was super nice. I was young, he would not remember, but I mean, I got to meet you. You guys played at the Reseda Country Club with the Crucified and Scattered too.
Yeah.
It's when the kid jumped off the stage dive and smashed himself and you know, the show had to stop. You know? I had met Roger a few times. Roger was there, super nice.
Hey, bro.
There was a guy though that I don't know if he's the same guy from the Set Free Ministries. His name was Biker
James.
Biker James. Yes.
Yes, Biker James. Yeah.
That dude was the nicest Hell's Angel looking son of a bitch I'd ever met in my life.
Yeah.
You know,
Biker
he
James
was actually selling your merch that night.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And I remember because I'd been going with my friends to punk rock shows, but I mean, this was Reseda, you know what I mean? So I will give this to my mom. As much as she disliked a lot of the metal, a lot of the stuff I was into, she did always support me and take me to shows if we could afford it, you know what I mean? So I'm 14 at the time, but man, I'm 6'3" at that time. I mean, except for the tattoos, I looked the same. I looked like I was 30, you know what I mean? So and I was always street smart, so I mean, I was able to handle myself. But I mean, you know, I wouldn't drop off any of my kids in the Reseda, you know what I mean, back then. You know what I mean? But, Biker James was super nice guy, and that's the one thing that I always felt was not fake, even though there is an agenda, there is we're talking about the Lord or doing whatnot, but they also were just nice people, you know what I mean? There wasn't, you know, before I was in my line of work, I'm a body piercer. I've been doing it for about 27 years now.
Awesome, dude. That's cool.
I used to do professional security for a living. I mean, I've done everybody from Alice Cooper to Wayne Newton. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow. That's cool, man.
And I've met a lot of great people, and I've met a lot of really jerk-ass
people,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wayne Newton was the biggest one. Like, ooh, whack, you know what I mean? But I always thought in my mind, I didn't want to think that the accessibility was just the webbing to lure kids in to the message. You know what I mean?
Sure, sure.
So, I mean, and I don't know if you and George still talk. Me and George were friends.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we had a Facebook issue. It was politics. I shouldn't have gotten into it, and I can be abrasive at times, so please tell George I'm sorry. I'd love to interview him at some point in time as well.
Oh, did he block you?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
I was being a jerk that day, and he said something. I don't consider myself Democrat or Republican. I'm very much just liberal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, and he said something, and I was like, "This is bullshit," And he blocked me. But
George, well, I'll tell you, George is the master of saying a bunch of crap, and it's funny. He'll go back later. He won't do it publicly, but he'll be like, "Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that." And it's funny. I told him, we reversed roles as we aged. I go, because I was the one who used to just shoot from the hip and was loud-mouthed and had zero filter when I was younger. And George was actually very much, very reserved, but at the same time, very much the salesman. He was really, really good at being a salesman. Well, it's his living, that's what he does for a living, still to this day. And he's just really, really good at that. But now he just spurts out sometimes whatever's on his mind. Yeah. And Facebook is the best platform for being a big turd. Yeah. And when you want to be one, you can definitely be one, even he'll text me and he'll laugh and say, "Dude, go look and see what an asshole I'm being on Facebook." And I just start laughing, because I'm like, "Oh God, what did he do now?" And I'll go and I'll look and I start laughing, it's just like, dude,
it's because of George also. After, we moved back to Colorado Springs for a little bit after we'd been in Ventura, and George called me, and that's when he was playing with Vengeance at the time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They were playing up in Denver at the Gothic Theater, and so I was like, he's like, "Do you want to come up and hang out for the day?" I'm like, "Well, hey man, like I've been a working class guy my whole life." I'm like, "Man, tell me, I'll come up early. I'll help unload all the gear. I'll sell merch if you need me to. And that was actually at 15, the very first show I ever worked was Vengeance.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Theater. Yeah, and so again. My mom and dad drove me up there, dropped me off for the day, and, we unloaded all the merch and, set everything up, and I did security that night at the show and tore everything down. And, so because of George, that was my first show I ever got to work, which made me say, I really like doing this, and was able to do it for quite a few years and make good money doing it,
Oh, dude, that is cool.
Yeah.